Welcome to this course on issues in bioethics. This is module 1 and unit 3. So, this lecture will focus on the topic historical evolution of bioethics. This is in continuation with what we have been doing in the previous 2 lectures, where we have just introduced the discipline bioethics, and here we are trying to see some of the very important historical factors that were responsible to the emergence of bioethics, or rather more appropriately modern bioethics. So, I have been referring to this, that the whole idea of traditional medical morality and a passage from this traditional medical morality to modern bioethics has been a very interesting passage. And there are several factors that have that are responsible for this passage, or rather the emergence of modern bioethics. Some of them are political, some of them are scientific, some of them are technological. So, we will try to see some of these factors in this lecture as well as the coming one. In this context, we have to also address this problem, some problems with traditional medical morality, which we will address here, that what characterizes the modern day medicine is the way in which medicine functions in the society, with hospitals and with technology and with a lot of scientific knowledge. That was not the case in the ancient society. So, there it was mostly a relationship between the patient and the physician, but now that has changed. And ethics of human experimentation and medical trials. So, this has been a very important issue, or rather a very important problem, which actually was responsible for the emergence of modern bioethics, that there are a lot of human experimentation was necessary for the growth, for the emergence of modern medicine. And on the one hand, this human experimentations were necessary. On the other hand, human experimentations involve human beings as subjects. So, this raises this scenario actually raises a lot of interesting questions, which traditional medical morality was unable to tackle with. So, you need a set of new norms, a new set of new standards to deal with such situations. So, modern bioethics tries to respond to such situations. Again, the problem of regulating medical research has become so important in this context, because on the one hand, as I mentioned, you need research, but on the other hand, you need to regulate it properly, because otherwise a lot of rights will be violated, a lot of legal and ethical issues will be generated. So, we have to be careful about it, and we have to strike a right balance between these two. So, that is the challenge of the modern day. Now, when we talk about traditional medical morality, the traditional image of a physician is a person who is very honest, very caring, and who delivers his duties not for money, and who is completely dedicated towards his patients and also to the trade and all that. So, we have this image of a traditional physician who is almost equated with God, who is a divine figure in many civilizations. Particularly in India, for example, the Vaidya is considered as almost equivalent to God, and people had ultimate trust on him. And the traditional moral codes basically upheld this image, because as in the previous lecture we have seen, there was a lot of emphasis on how the physician should conduct himself, how patients should conduct himself, or rather the emphasis on individual conduct is quite evident. And there again, the underlying assumption is that the physician has to be trusted. Patients have to trust the physician, and for that the physicians should earn the trust of the patients, and for that they have to conduct themselves in a certain manner. But this model is completely out of place in today's modern society, where values are different. By 20th century, we can see that the traditional medical morality started facing problems due to the several factors, historical, political, economical, and social, and several other factors. We have to see this context a little more carefully to understand how modern medicine has emerged and how it demanded, this kind of an emergence demanded the emergence of modern bioethics as well. Now, the conditions in which medicine was practiced has changed in the modern day, because the society was totally different. The ancient societies were totally different, and modern societies, with the emergence of capitalism, with the emergence of cities, factories, and the lifestyle of people have completely changed. So, all these demanded a different approach to medicine and health. See, this whole idea of public health has become really important with the emergence of cities, with the emergence of increased urbanization, where people started coming and living in one particular place, which was actually originally not their natural abode. So, this actually had raised a lot of issues, health problems, and naturally to serve these problems, or rather to cater to these problems, hospitals have emerged, and a different set of issues also. And now, it is in this context we have to see the progress in science, particularly rapid expansion of biological sciences that has happened during the end of 19th century, particularly in the 20th century, and now it is again happening. Almost every day there is a new invention. So, these kind of rapid changes also have revolutionized the way in which we practice medicine. And now new treatment methods evolved, advances in medical technologies. We have seen that today medicine relies a lot on technology, a lot, where compared to our 10 years back even. And the practice of science came into conflict with traditional and religious values and belief. So, this is a very interesting scenario which we have to address, because many of these new technologies enabled us to do several things which we were not able to do earlier. This situation poses a lot of interesting ethical issues, a lot of interesting conceptual worries to the society. For instance, ventilators. I will be discussing that a little while. Medicine became a more attractive profession in terms of material benefit. So, naturally more and more people have started coming to medicine. See, for instance, in traditional societies, if you take the example of India, Vaidyas, there were Vaidya families, and mostly it was a family trade, and it was not a very lucrative trade. The society insisted that Vaidyas should function or should deliver their duties without any real profit motives or for the sake of money. They should not be functioning for the sake of money. So, now with the emergence of modern medicine, it has provided physicians with a lot of new comforts which early Vaidyas were not enjoying. So, naturally medicine has become a lucrative profession. There is a situation in the society that physicians can earn a lot of money and fame in today's world, a lot of recognition from the society. So, all these have attracted a lot of people to medicine, and medicine has become an industry today, which we have briefly examined in the previous lecture. The profession has become quite attractive in that way. And then atrocities of Second World War is another very important historical event that created a situation for the emergence of modern bioethics, because humanity now had to tackle certain issues which it might inevitably face, or it had already faced. So, you have to now resolve certain issues. So, we will be discussing that in this lecture. Now, let us see some of the important catalysts that led to the emergence of the kind of bioethics what we today know as modern bioethics. First of all, the emergence of individualism in the society. This is a very interesting social phenomenon, where you can see that after enlightenment, after around 18th century or so, in Europe there is this phenomenon called the emergence of individualism. The individual is becoming more and more important. The class identities of individuals have become less and less important, and the individual himself or herself has become recognized as a moral agent. So, this recognition of moral agency in each individual made him or her quite significant and important in the society. So, this makes the individual almost at the center. It places the individual at the center of moral reasoning. So, it is the individual who is more important. this kind of an individualism which emerged in the society has naturally influenced the way in which ethics and moral reasoning developed during these following centuries. And of course, the Nazi atrocities in Germany have created a situation where humanity in general have to come together and think about certain situations, how to tackle certain situations. The Nuremberg Code, the quite famous Nuremberg Code were developed in this situation as a response to this Nazi atrocities, and this also had contributed heavily to the emergence of modern bioethics. Now, the scientific and technological advancements have definitely a major impact in the way in which medicine has developed into what it is today, and also in response to that, bioethics. Illegal and unethical clinical trials which had taken place and which even today take place in many parts of the world. Sometime back, I remember there was this infamous incident which involved the Cancer Institute of Trivandrum with Johns Hopkins University. They were in the news that the many newspapers have come up with this argument that they have conducted several clinical trials which was unethical and illegal. So, such things happen in many parts of the world even today, though many of such incidents we do not know, the common man really do not know whether what is fact, what is truth, because media plays a very important role in such things, and whether what the media says is right or not, there is no way to determine, there is no way to decide, and quite often specialists have to come into picture and give their verdict. So, on occasions such cases, such incidents have also gone to the court. So, there is a quite interesting incident which had happened in recent past in India is the case where the unfortunate woman Aruna Shanbag was taken to the Supreme Court for with a plea for mercy killing, euthanasia. And then there are certain global initiatives to arrive at certain commonly accepted norms and regulations. There are certain global initiatives, like there is a WHO in today's world. So, they are all trying to arrive at some sort of a globally accepted guidelines which would oversee the activities that take place in the medical world. But I do not want to call it universalistic bioethics or global bioethics. Probably I would use the word phronetic bioethics, which I will be discussing in the following lectures. So, now let us come to the real problem, individualism, the emergence of individualism. Now, as I already mentioned, morality became more and more individual centric at some point of time in human history after enlightenment, somewhere around 18th century in Europe, and in many other places now this process of emergence of individualism is taking place with the breakdown of traditional family structures like joint family system in India, for example. Now, the joint family system in India is it is breaking down. Instead, we have this what we call nuclear families. So, this also is creating a situation where individuals are becoming more and more important than families or communities and all that. So, individual should have control over his or her body is a kind of approach today most of us have. There is a lot of focus, there is a lot of importance given to the individual in today's society. Again, protection of the individual from coercion of powerful institutions and governments. So, this is again, this factor again underlines the importance of some strong regulations and norms for protecting the rights of the individuals. So, there is a need that individuals need to be protected from the powerful institutions like hospitals, for example, in this context, and also governments and many other institutions with which the modern society functions. So, that there is a strong morality which centers around the individual, and again several things happened that raised a concern for the protection of the individual. Several things happened in society in the past few decades. There are social, political and economic developments have happened. The way in which capitalism is developing today is also quite alarming, that whether it really takes care of the concerns of the individual, the emotional concerns, the other various concerns of the individual. For example, the philosophies of existentialism was a strong response to the kind of collectivism modern societies were emphasizing. So, the moral concerns or moral assumptions were strongly rooted in a conception of individualism. The need for medical research, I have already mentioned this in the beginning of this lecture, that it involves, it cannot avoid some sort of harming the individual, because human beings have to be there to participate as subjects of such experimentation in medical research. So, such experimentation might sometimes inevitably harm the individuals, that cannot be avoided. On the other hand, if you say that no harm should be allowed, which is equivalent to say that there should not be any medical research, which is again not good for the society. So, somewhere we have to keep a balance, we have to allow medical research to happen which involves minimum harm. So, it is in this context we have developed certain concepts like informed consent and all, which we will be discussing later. So, now when you come to the domain of medical research, which is one of the most controversial domains, which call for very strong ethical regulations and norms. Can we justify making humans subject to dangerous experimentation? I have raised this problem. Under what conditions we can do this, and what are the rights of the subjects? So, this is again another concern. The subjects who participate, who have consented to participate in a particular research, what rights do they have? Can they terminate? Can they say that okay, from hereafter I am not cooperating, I am not participating in the research, I am withdrawing, which implies that the firm which is conducting the research will have to bear a huge loss. But do the individuals participating have such right, or whether these organizations which conduct research also have certain rights? All such questions have to be deliberated upon when we come to this issue. How are they to be compensated? How are these subjects who participate in this to be compensated, and what is their role in the entire process? This domain as such is very interesting, because if you examine traditional moral frameworks which are available, for instance deontologism and utilitarianism, both of them might have very different viewpoints about this. Utilitarians, for example, might argue that it is okay for one or two individuals to sacrifice their rights for the sake of the common good, for the sake of the society. On the other hand, deontologism values individual life. Deontologism asserts that no individual should be treated as a means to an end. Every individual is an end in itself. So, in that way they hold quite opposite views. So, this itself is a confusing scenario, presents a confusing scenario for us. And religious traditions of course often oppose such a situation, where using individuals or employing individuals as research subjects, because they say that this might possibly harm them, and any harm to individuals is to be avoided according to many religious traditions. So, they also oppose this. The domain of ethics of human experimentation is a very interesting domain, and there is a history behind it, how this has emerged, and we will have to see that history also to really appreciate what are the major aspects of it. And now the ethics of human experimentation has become a major issue with the rapid development of science and technology, because it is the new possibilities which science and technology brought human society to do, that generated many interesting ethical dilemmas and problems. So, in that way that is very interesting. Again, the human experimentations and other studies conducted on human beings, for example on Jews and war prisoners by the Nazis, were investigated after the World War II. So, this is a very crucial point in the whole history of the development of ethics of human experimentation. the Nuremberg Code, what we come to know as Nuremberg Code, and many other things which followed after that. The facts revealed literally shook the world, and there were serious thoughts about arriving at international guidelines and regulations, which was not very easy, because as we know that the world has a lot of there are different cultures with different cultural beliefs and customs. So, in such a world, to arrive at certain common guidelines and regulations is not very easy. So, but that is a challenge which many ethicists face in contemporary world. And there is, in this context, we have to actually contemplate, we have to think about moving towards certain global norms, which are, as I mentioned some time back, phronetic in nature, not universalistic in nature. Now, when we focus on the atrocities by the Nazis, the Nuremberg trials actually represent a milestone event in the emergence of modern bioethics in this way. So, after the World War II, the Nazi physicians were prosecuted for conducting inhuman and cruel clinical trials and human experimentation. They have conducted, it was revealed that they have conducted several inhuman experimentation on Jews and war criminals. And the Nuremberg trials, the Charter of the International Military Tribunal established the laws and the procedures on August 16, 1945 for the Nuremberg trials. And they conducted in total 12 trials involving over 100 defendants from 1945 to 1949. And the trials found that many studies were conducted violating all rights of the human beings who were forced to participate in them. So, there was this whole thing called forced participation. The prisoners had no other choice. They were forcefully made subjects to such experimentations conducted by the Nazi physicians. And they killed Jews for anatomical research and to study the effects of and treatments for high altitude conditions, freezing, malaria, poison gas, sulfonamide, bone, muscle and nerve regeneration, bone transplantation, saltwater consumption, epidemic jaundice, sterilization, typhus, poisons and incendiary bombs. So, human beings were literally treated like animals by the Nazi physicians, and euthanasia, they also performed euthanasia on sick and disabled civilians in Germany and other occupied territories. So, such inhuman activities were probed and actually gave the world an opportunity to think about strong regulations. So, this is a quote from Robert Jackson, who was a chief prosecutor of the United States at a war crimes trial. He says, I quote, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated." Unquote. The trials finally arrived at certain courts. It was a first attempt by any international committee to formulate a generally accepted code of conduct governing the ethical aspects of human research. So, in that sense, the Nuremberg codes are milestone event that has happened in the history of medicine, Western medicine or modern medicine. The trial finally came up with a code of ethics setting out standards to which physicians must conform when carrying out experiments on human subjects, and there are around laid down 10 standards to which physicians must conform when they carry out experiments on human subjects. I will be very briefly mentioning these codes. I am not going to elaborately discuss them here, but the idea behind each code will be highlighted. The first one is the notion of voluntary informed consent is underlined. The individual has the right to decide what to do with his body. So, this is something which is very important as far as the Nuremberg codes were concerned, which was later on of course modified a little bit by the Helsinki declaration and all. Experiments should yield fruitful results to common good. we have seen that many of the experiments which the Nazi physicians conducted was not done with careful deliberations and scientific analysis or study. They just did it to see what will happen, but now it is insisted that it should be done. It should be done only if we are quite sure that it will yield fruitful research to common good. Now, experiments should be based on the result of animal experimentation and prior scientific knowledge. So, this is a presupposition for any human experimentation. Now, unnecessary pain and suffering must be avoided. So, this is very important. If wherever possible, suffering and pain should be avoided, and no injury to the patient should be part of the experiment. Risk must be weighed against expected benefit. As I already mentioned, we cannot avoid certain amount of risk. So, it must be very carefully weighed against expected benefit. Then again, protect the experimental subjects against even remote possibilities of injury, disability or death. Experiments should be conducted by qualified professionals. Participants has the right to withdraw at any point of time. So, this is another very important point which is stressed by the codes, that they have the right, because the participants, the human beings who are now subjects, have total control over their bodies. So, they have the right to withdraw from the experiment at any point of time, and the scientist also should stop the experiment at any stage if he thinks that a continuation of the experiment is likely to cause harm to the people who are involved in it. So, these are the general framework. This is the general framework of the Nuremberg codes, which several other bodies modified later. Now, the Declaration of Helsinki is another very interesting milestone event that has happened in the history of modern bioethics. The Third General Assembly of the World Medical Association at London in October 1949 adopted the International Code of Medical Ethics. This code actually stipulated the duties of physicians in general. So, the relationship between physician and the patients, physicians and other physicians. So, basically concentrating on the physicians, what the physicians' responsibilities are in general. So, this was the focus of this code, and in 1964 the WMA formulated a set of ethical guidelines for physicians and other participants in medical research, which is famously known as the Declaration of Helsinki. Most of the codes which are formulated by the Nuremberg Code was repeated here or reasserted here with slight modification. And now, this is another very unfortunate incident that has happened in human history, in modern human history, and that too it has happened in the United States of America, where a lot of research happens, where a lot of scientific and medical research happen. This is known as the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis, and unfortunately which caused a lot of harm to the blacks in America. So, what has happened was the US Public Health Service and the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama conducted a study to record the natural history of syphilis. And here a medical study that monitored to discover the effects of untreated syphilis. The purpose of the study itself raises a lot of questions, because it wants to study the effects of untreated syphilis, and human beings are employed for this. And to study the effects of syphilis in the bodies of the African American males who are in the second stage of syphilis. So, in that sense we can say that it was a race based experiment. No whites were included in the study, only blacks, only African American men, initially 399 black men with syphilis, and this is another very important fact, 201 black men who did not have the disease. They were also part of the study, and the study surprisingly lasted for 40 years. So, let us have a close look at what has happened during this Tuskegee study. It was from the very outset we can say that an illegal and unethical study. No informed consent was obtained. none of the participants knew what they were subjected to or what was the situation, or they were not given proper information about what is happening to them and what was the situation. For taking part in the study, the subjects received free medical exams, free meals and burial insurance. That is the only thing they have been benefited. Subjects were administered penicillin, but told that they were received medical treatment for bad blood. And in 1972, the public came to know about the study and it was stopped following a public outcry. When the news came in the press, there was a public outcry against the study and the government was forced to stop it. But now we will see what has happened afterwards. Many people, some of the survivors filed a lawsuit. They have approached the court, and the public health service and the physicians for violating the rights of the physicians, of the patients involved. And the study violated the constitutional rights of the participant, as it knew that the participants had syphilis and it did not treat them properly. So, this was the violation of a very important, very serious violation of the rights of the participants. First of all, the rights of the participants were violated without telling them what exactly is happening to them, and they were not treated in spite of the fact that medicine was available to treat them. In 1973, the participants won the case and were awarded $10 million compensation. So, this again has generated a lot of interest in this whole domain of ethics of experimental research. So, the issues highlighted was there was no proper information, participants were given the impression that they were being properly treated for their disease, but they were not. So, this has again become another very important guideline, that proper information should be given. So, and then take consent from the participants. So, there was no informed consent taken from these participants of the Tuskegee study, and many died due to lack of treatment in this process. Many of these deaths could have been avoided. That is the very sad scenario, that it was not that it was inevitable or unavoidable. They could have easily avoided because treatment was available during that time, but it was not done. And it was more important, or rather the most important of violations is that the study was racially motivated. Only African Americans and no whites were part of the study, and there were no rules and regulations governing the study. So, in this context, there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of emphasis on regulating medical research worldwide, not only in United States, but everywhere. So, there is an attempt to arrive at some sort of global norms to protect the subjects, to hail human rights, to underline the value of informed consent, more towards the central principle of modern bioethics, autonomy, which we will be seeing examining in some of our later lectures. The concept of autonomy, which has become almost like a central theme, central concept in modern bioethics. So, we can see that there is a move towards that and making the individual at the center, which I have already mentioned. So, this is the broad context of medical research, ethics of medical research, which we have examined. And now, we will examine another very important factors, the rapid developments that have taken place in science and technology, and the way in which they have been integrated to the practice of medicine, and the kind of ethical issues they generate. So, we will discuss that in the next lecture. For the time being, thank you.